Thank you for joining our backup recovery office hours for June. My name is Tim Chen. Uh, I work in the database backup and recovery product management team. And with me today is Marco Calmasini and Kelly Smith from our team as well. We're going to present latest updates in our backup recovery technology area. So that includes recovery appliance, database backup cloud service, and recovery manager. Next slide. Okay. So on the recovery appliance front, I just wanted to kind of get a quick update on release kind of state of affairs and some of the updates that we have on the support side as well. So our current release for recovery appliance is what we call our March 2020 interim patch release 4. Okay? So those who are using recovery appliance today probably aware that we do a typical monthly PSU cycle. So we aim to target that every month. Sometimes it slips, as you see here. We're still in March, but we are now releasing interim patches as we get critical fixes and other changes into the software. So the latest and greatest could be an interim patch, it could be a PSU. Today, it's what we call our interim patch release 4. Okay, we are expecting to release a June PSU in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll go to a new minor release that we call 19.2.112. Right. So with the interim patch release 4, all the recovery appliance releases are cumulative. So the latest and greatest is what you should always use, okay, for any patching event. Now, specifically in this release, we have fixes in the RDBMS area. So these were issues from the core database we use for the recovery appliance catalog. And so there were a number of these fixes included once we discovered them and had them resolved, okay, on the database side, and then we uptook those into the recovery appliance software itself. So this had to do with GC wait events. Typically, you see lock deadlock type of messages in your alert logs. The common symptoms that can arise when you see this kind of issue is things like node crashes, things like ordering waits. Essentially affects the system as a whole. All right, so this is obviously a critical issue, and therefore we released interim patch for this as we saw them. We've gone through 4 of these now since March. So this is our latest one. As we're finding these issues, we're including them into the software release itself. Now, fixes also include those related to metadata inconsistencies. These are issues where the recovery appliance metadata management, if you will, gets out of sync with what's actually on the disk. So you have, for example, ordering waits or other kinds of incidents that come up when you try to validate, say, the backup piece, et cetera. So these metadata inconsistencies are progressively being resolved as we see them again, and we include those in the interim patches going forward. From a product functionality standpoint, we also have some updates in the latest release. Non-DNS support. This came from a number of APAC customers who don't implement DNS in their sites for security and for compliance reasons. We also introduced flexible real-time redo compression settings. So if you're using the redo transport feature, these logs coming in, these archive logs, are always compressed on the recovery appliance. You now have a choice to compress them with different settings, such as high, medium, low, similar to how RMAN compression works. You can do this so that to balance out, say, performance impact on the CPUs, okay, for doing the default compression. So you might choose, say, low or medium to reduce the effect of the CPU on the recovery appliance in that compression phase before we write and store the logs. And you should also be aware the trade-off for using low and medium, for example, is, by the names themselves, you'll have potentially less compression ratio than you would with default. So these things should obviously be tested, and you shouldn't just implement these wholesale. But if you are seeing kind of CPU contention or utilization problems on the recovery appliance, given your load, and you're using Redo Transport for across all your clients, this might be something to take a look at. All right, so look at the README, which lists all the bugs for more details and updates, right, for details on this. We also had an update on the Archive to Cloud module so that you can have additional efficiencies and performance with our recovery appliance copying backups to our Oracle Cloud Storage. On the support note side, we have a new RE Information Center note. You can see here, the old one had to be revamped, and so we are now kind of rebuilding our new note. We were in the process of putting all the original links back into the new formats, and definitely let us know feedback on this note if there are things you'd like to see that aren't there today. But just bookmark this note and keep it handy, and we're look for changes as we go forward. We also have a our updated release and patching policy note, and the most recent thing here I want to mention is that we do announce deprecated software releases in this note. So as of today, that 12.2.111 releases and earlier are not supported, and so they require an upgrade to our current 19.2.111 release. As we issue new releases, both minor and major releases, we do also move the older releases to obsolete mode. And typically we don't do it, it's not done very quickly. We allot some time for customers to be able to make that transition, but keep an eye on this note so you're aware of the latest supportability status for recovery appliance software. And last but not least to mention is always subscribe to our Moz Hot Topic Alerts. And this functionality in Moz allows you to get automatically updated on any critical issues, updates to notes you mark as under this you want to get notified on. Just it's a handy thing to have, right? Especially with critical issues, you want to be able to review those as soon as they come up and take action if desired. The last thing I want to cover here on the product update side for recovery appliance is the DataGuard configuration, and specifically this is regarding Active DataGuard license, typically for use of blockchain tracking, which is our fast incremental backups feature. For using this on standby database, you need to license the Active DataGuard option. Okay, so that's needed both on the standby and on the primary. There was a recent change done, and if you look at the Oracle documentation set and also in this white paper link below, you'll see that more details. But we made a change that this license is waived now, okay, if your incremental backups and redo are taken solely to a recovery appliance destination. So what we wanted to do was to make the entry point into using recovery appliance for existing customers, as easy as possible from a licensing perspective. So for the use of fast incrementals, which is really fundamental in some ways to recovery appliance because of the incremental forever methodology. So fast incrementals obviously let you save cycles and save time by reading and writing just the change blocks, right? And so we want to make that an easier path for existing customers. If you decide to have other backup strategies with blockchain tracking, say you have some with disk or tape, or you have a dual backup strategy, or you choose to use any other DataGuard feature, this will require Active DataGuard licensing. So it's only specifically for blockchain tracking style backups and using Cascaded Redo. Now, Cascaded Redo is, I believe, enabled in 12C going forward. So that feature is available, and if you use that from a standby to a recovery appliance destination for real-time redo, that's also waived the license for Active DataGuard. Right. So I will now pass it to Marco for the update on Database Backup Cloud Service.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So the update on the Database Backup Cloud Service is a new version of the libopc, the SBT library used by the Database Backup Cloud module. The change is in the way we manage the multi-path upload. So for those of you that are familiar with our legacy modules, right, you probably noticed that the libopc, the SBT library divides the backup pieces, so the RMAN data, the RMAN backup pieces that are uploaded to the cloud bucket, divides them into 100 megabytes chunks, as you can see in this little picture down here, right? In this example, if you have a 500 megabytes RMAN backup piece, then it translates into 500 megabytes in size objects in the cloud bucket. When we introduced the OCI native module, we move this. Can you click once, please? Yeah. We changed this so that we now use multi-path upload. It means that we first initiate the upload, then we upload all the chunks, and then we commit the upload. And when we commit the uploads, those different chunks are combined back together into a single object in the bucket. And now, so we have kind of one-to-one mapping between the RMAN backup piece and the object in the cloud. In the previous version of this OCI native module, we had a limit of 100 chunks, and so it means a limit of 10 gigabytes for a single object. After which we created another object, more or less with the same logic we used before, right? So a 20 gigabytes RMAN backup piece would translate into 2 objects, and obviously larger objects, larger backup pieces, even more objects. This was still causing, a higher number of objects in the bucket, and especially when using archive storage, it was, less performing in the restore phase that you have to initiate, that RMAN initiates when you need to do an RMAN restore and get the data out of archive storage back into standard storage. So in the new version, we increased the number of chunks or parts that we upload before committing up to 10,000. So we now went up to 1 terabytes as a maximum object size in the bucket before creating another bucket. But we think with this would cover probably most, if not all, of the type of backup pieces that are uploaded to the cloud. Obviously, you can control this through the section size, etc. This is more efficient. This is the same library that is also part of the new ZDLRA PSU that is being released and that Tim mentioned. We recommend using this new library, updating it by running the installer again, the OCI installer. If you are still using the legacy module, the one installed by the OPC installer, using the Swift compatible interface in OCI, we recommend to go to this new module and take advantage of this. And from the link here, you can go to OTN and download it, install it. It's totally compatible with the previous one, so it means that the legacy Swift-based module are still available and accessible. No action is needed to make any transition, conversion, etc. You can just install the new module and keep going, and you will take advantage of this. You will take advantage of archive storage if you want, and you will still be able to access the old backups transparently. And I think that's all. If you have questions, obviously feel free to ask them in the Q&A tool. And yeah, I think Kelly, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you so much, Marco. I'm going to talk a little bit about transparent data encryption, or TDE table spaces now, and how that works with RMAN, give you some tips and tricks so that you're prepared for TDE backups, because there are some nuances around that that you need to be aware of. Okay, so first let's talk about the history of TDE. Column encryption was introduced in 10.2, and we've added functionality through releases. So you can see table encryption was added in 11.1. We had some offline table space encryption added in 12.2, which was then backported to 12.1 and 11.2. And now we have online table encryption, and RMAN has introduced the ability to restore as encrypted, and I'll talk about that functionality a little bit later with 12.2 and later. Okay, so let's talk about some basics. So master keys, which control the TDE table space encryption, are stored in a local wallet, or they can be installed, or they can be managed through an external key manager like Oracle Key Vault. So you can use a local wallet that's on the system, or you can use a centralized management system like Key Vault. One thing you need to be aware of is the wallets are not backed up by RMAN because you don't want to store your key with your backup, because that means if someone obtains the backup, they have the ability to get to the data that's inside the backup. So we want to keep that data separate, which means that you need to, have a different method for protecting that key. And that key is very important, because if you lose your key, obviously you can't open the encryption to get to the table space or to your backup. So be very, very careful with those keys. Have a management paradigm around that to make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. Another thing to point out about use of TDE encryption is purpose-built backup appliances like the recovery appliance, anything that's used in deduplication and compression. Those are two separate processes, and introduction of encryption can impact your compression capabilities. So be aware of that, because all of a sudden, if you introduce TDE in your production environment, that's going to have a trickle-down effect into the backup storage required to protect that database. And in a lot of cases, we see that, it's very typical for that backup space to double after TDE encryption is enabled, because all the compression capabilities that you had previously disappear. So something to be aware of. Make that part of your planning. Please do testing ahead of time, and I'll talk about some of the capabilities for testing in a little bit later as well. All the backup and restore paradigms follow very closely, because RMAN still does all the work. RMAN is your backup utility for the Oracle database. It understands how to deal with TDE. So review always your RMAN user's guide that's appropriate for the release of the Oracle database that you're using. This is a link to the 19C documentation. Go have a look at that. This is also the place that you can see some of the new features that have been introduced in RMAN. So that's always a good place to revisit, so you understand what capabilities are available for the release of the database that you're using. Okay, so now let's talk about backup operations specifically. So I mentioned that encryption reduces the effectiveness of compression. So your backup spaces are going to increase. And of course, could become very critical when you move from unencrypted to encrypted. You don't want your backup location to run out of space unexpectedly, so plan ahead of that. RMAN compression can be leveraged to help with this, but be aware that RMAN compression can impact deduplication. So now you've introduced yet another potential increase in storage space, because you've solved the compression problem, but now you've impacted the deduplication paradigm. So you have to leverage, compression versus deduplication and figure out which has the best impact in your environment. Of course, with RMAN compression, there are licensing implications from an RMAN perspective, because to get to more advanced features in RMAN from a compression perspective, you need the advanced security option. And when enabling compression, of course, that's extra CPU cycles, so pay attention to your CPU resource utilization, because you don't want to put too much pressure on your production database by turning on compression, especially as you're looking at different compression levels. Higher compression levels mean more CPU cycles, which means more CPU cycles are used on your production database, so be aware of that. From a best practices perspective, we typically recommend HCC or OLTP compression, which means that the data is being compressed at the source. So RMAN is not compressing the data, the database itself is compressing the data before it even comes into RMAN. So inside the data is being compressed, which means that the data is compressed prior to backup. And is compressed as part of the encryption, so you don't have to worry about so much of an impact as TDE is implemented. Your data is compressed before it's encrypted, so you end up with kind of the best of both worlds there. But again, there are licensing implications, because if you turn on compression inside the database, you have to have the advanced compression option. So something else to consider. Obviously, like I mentioned, you have kind of the best of both worlds here, because you're getting compression and encryption before you even reach backup, so the data is already nicely organized. Another best practice to remember with TDE, you need to take new level 0 backups when you move into TDE. So if you have an existing unencrypted table space, you're going to move it to encrypted. After that encryption takes place, you need to take a new level 0 to make sure that you have a baseline of all the encrypted blocks that now exist in the database. Also, during a rekey operation, you need to ensure that you're taking a new level 0 backup for the database, because the rekey impacts the entire table space. So make sure you get a new table space backup when that operation occurs. Okay, moving onward. If you look at TDE tablespace backups, we're going to look at this from the perspective of RMAN with compression and without compression. This first paradigm, this first walkthrough, we're going to talk about RMAN without compression. So this means that RMAN does not re-encrypt the backups if the TDE is already enabled. Let's get that clear real quick. So when RMAN receives the backup, if the data coming from the database is already encrypted, RMAN simply passes that encryption forward into the backup pieces. So RMAN does not decrypt the data and store it as unencrypted. We want to make sure that database encryption is maintained throughout the entire life cycle. So RMAN doesn't want to break that paradigm. So it does not decrypt the data and send it out as unencrypted. If you look at the layout below, you'll notice the backup header piece is clear. That means that it is not encrypted. Each block header is also clear. It's only the data block, which is your data, that gets encrypted during the TDE encryption process. So that means that we have a very clear understanding of the boundaries of data with the deduplication solutions. They can see where data blocks begin, data blocks end, because the encryption is bound around the user data. But the user data obviously is the spot where compression would typically benefit. And because that data is encrypted, compression on that user data doesn't take place once encryption is enabled. And as I mentioned before, a lot of your data is obviously in the user data space, and that means that enabling TDE negates the capabilities of compression, and typically we see that backups more than double after TDE is enabled. So something to be aware of. Now, if we look at RMAN using compression, so what happens in this paradigm when RMAN is using compression, you'll see that RMAN is actually decrypting the data, compressing the contents, and re-encrypting the data. Now, if we look at this same data layout at the bottom, when that decryption, compression, and re-encryption occurs, now all of a sudden the block headers are also going to be encrypted. So now after the backup piece header, everything following that is encrypted, which causes severe impacts on deduplication enabled solutions, because now the data stream, the entire data stream itself, user data, the individual block headers, that entire stream is encrypted. So the effectiveness of deduplication now disappears with RMAN compression. So you get the compression of the user data, but now you've lost the effectiveness of deduplication. So be very careful with that. One, we talked about the recovery appliance at the beginning. Tim covered all the latest updates to that. One thing we know for sure is that if you turn on RMAN compression with TDE, incremental forever is lost because we can't manage the data blocks any longer. All that is in one encrypted stream, and the individual data blocks that the recovery appliance would have managed before you did this now just becomes one big blob, and that means that you break your incremental forever paradigm. So using compression, RMAN compression with TDE is not supported or is not recommended with the recovery appliance, because you're going to lose your incremental forever capability. And that's one of the key components for the recovery appliance. So be very careful around that. Now let's talk about a couple of features that came in with the Database 19 release. We have this concept of as encrypted. And we did that so that if you have an on-premises database that is not encrypted and you want to move to the Oracle Cloud, for example, Oracle Cloud has a requirement that the data in the cloud must be encrypted. So that means you must take the database that you're moving to the cloud and move it from unencrypted to encrypted. And that's what this process does. You take your database backup, you can store the backup into the cloud, and then you can recover into the cloud as encrypted. So the non-encrypted database that you have on premises, when you use this as encrypted, now gets encrypted and placed in the cloud as required by the cloud. With that also came as decrypted. So that same process, you have the on-premises database, you've restored it as encrypted in the cloud. Now, if you want to take that encrypted database, back it up, and then restore it back into your on-premises decrypted location, you can use the as decrypted. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that you cannot take these. Well, the one thing you need to be aware of is these two pieces of functionality work hand in hand with each other. The encrypted piece encrypts going into the cloud. The decrypted piece decrypts out of the cloud. Decrypted cannot be used against just a standard TDE database. So if you went through the TDE process to encrypt a database, you cannot then use RMAN to decrypt it. That breaks the paradigm of encryption and would cause a security problem. The only time that you can use decrypt is when encrypted was used to restore the database. So this is kind of an unwinding. Just think of the decrypted as an unwinding of the encrypted in the previous command. Then the last thing I wanted to point out from an RMAN restore perspective is RMAN has this concept of from platform, which allows you to do cross-platform migration. Cross-platform migration is not supported with TDE. Once the database is encrypted on a particular platform, you can't use RMAN to move that data to a different platform type, leveraging from platform. There are other ways to do the migration, but RMAN cannot be used once TDE is encrypted on the original platform before the cross-platform migration. So that's something obviously you want to be aware of. If you're going to make a leap to change platforms, you don't want to go down the path of TDE until after that platform migration is completed. Next, it's easy to practice with TDE. We've got in the documentation the steps that help you move an on-premises database into the cloud, and those steps, give you the opportunity to practice. If you're planning on doing a TDE implementation, go through this process. Put the data in the cloud. It gives you a sandbox to play in. You can prepare for TDE without having a lot of resources being consumed on premises. You can leverage the cloud to experiment with wallet management and what it means for backup and restore and disaster recovery. So you can do your whole planning leveraging cloud resources so that you understand what TDE means for your environment, for your operating procedures. If you're doing, for example, database cloning, what does that mean for you once you've enabled TDE, and how are you going to manage that in this new paradigm when TDE is in the mix? So the cloud's a really good place to do some of that practice. And then, of course, when you're done with the cloud, it's very easy just to turn off that instance and delete it, and then implement your entire process with your production databases. Okay, so that's all we have today. Let me check the Q&A real quick to see if there are any open questions. And if you have any questions, now obviously is a time to send us those questions so that we can provide answers. Are there any questions from anyone? We've covered quite a few different topics today, from the recovery appliance, the latest updates on that, a little bit of changes in the licensing around recovery appliance. We've covered some changes in the cloud backup module, giving you a little bit of information about TDE, how that should be handled with RMAN. Any open questions? So we have a question that came in. Let's see, we've got a few coming in. Okay, here we go. I'll start with the easy one. So is the recording link going to be shared? Yes. So if you go to the Ask Tom website and you look at the backup and recovery section, you'll see the history of all the recordings that we've done, and this will become one of them. So we'll post this recording on the Ask Tom website, so you can definitely go and take a look at that. And like I say, there's a library there. You can look at all the previous ones as well. Let's see. What to do if TDE managed database backup is required to be restored in a separate platform? So, as I mentioned, cross-platform restores are not supported with RMAN. So you would have to, if you're going to go through a restore operation, you would have to leverage the same platform type, Big Endian or Little Endian, because you cannot cross between the two from a restore perspective. There are some migration techniques that you can use to get between the two. One of them, for example, if you're wanting to migrate from one platform, like a Big Endian to a Little Endian, one of the migration utilities that you could take a look at is Golden Gate. Golden Gate will get you migrated between the two. So that is an option. But from a pure restore perspective, you cannot cross Big Endian and Little Endian from a cross-platform perspective. The next question is, does XSCS make use of OCI native module? Marco, do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, sure. No, not at this time. The XSCS tooling and the DBCS tooling are on the same situation, I would say. They use the legacy module. They are still bound to using a username password-based authentication. The native OCI interface requires key pair authentication, key API signing. And so they still don't support it. Hopefully they will in the future. On XSCS, if you are not using the tooling and you are manually running your own scripts, Armen scripts, then yes, you can install the OCI native module manually and use it. But again, that would not be the automated backup managed through the console and through the tooling. It would be your own Armen script. So it's a different situation. Okay.
Okay. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. There's a question.
There's another one.
Yeah, I'll just notice that. Okay, so there's another question about transportable table spaces and restore. Again, this falls into the cross-platform restore functionality. So crossing Indians is not going to be a path for that as well. Other questions? Post them into the Q&A. Any other questions? Also be aware that you can ask us questions through the Ask Tom website. If you think of something after the session closes, we're always available for questions there. Also, if you have topics that you would like to cover via Ask Tom, please post your feedback to Ask Tom, the Ask Tom website. We can always produce a session that's going to be valuable to you. So post feedback around what you would like to see, what you would like to hear about from a backup and restore perspective. And also pay attention to the other Ask Tom sessions that are available on the website itself. There are lots of topics that get covered, and you can ask questions, request sessions, and topics to be covered in different sessions as well. So you don't just have to stay isolated to backup and recovery.
And that is true also if you're watching this as a recording, right? So if you're watching this offline recorded, if you have questions, just post them on the website and we'll try to answer them.
Yes. Last call for questions. Okay, no more questions. Thanks everyone for joining today. The session will be posted on the Ask Tom website shortly after the recording is complete. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for joining.